Hello and welcome to the next session of the course Introduction to Autonomous Systems. In the last session, we brought in the idea of science of systems and concluded that we need to look at engineering, non-engineering and different kind of disciplines in order to come up with systems that can function in the natural world in an autonomous manner. But you would realize that we have not really defined what we mean by autonomy. Now, as all of us know, autonomy can mean many things to many people, and it is important for us to establish a framework in which we define what we mean by autonomy and then look at how to enable it. So, let us begin this lecture on Introduction to Autonomy. So, as we have been mentioning earlier also, autonomy can be thought of as the capacity of a system to achieve a set of coordinated goals by its own means while adapting to environmental variations. If you look at this definition, it is nothing but saying what we as humans actually do, that we consider ourselves to be autonomous, that we have the capacity to achieve our goals by our own means and also taking care of the variations or the changes that happening in environment by adjusting ourselves. So, this exactly is what we are doing, and that is what we would like a system that we are going to create also to do, which means we are almost trying to replicate ourselves. Now, to do that, there are 5 independent attributes that are thought to be important for ensuring this kind of a system or this kind of a behavior, that you can achieve your own goals by your own means while adapting to environment. And people have come up with 5 independent attributes that must be present in any system so that it can be thought of being autonomous. These 5 attributes of autonomy are perception, reflection, goal management, planning and self-adaptation. We will look at each of these as to what they mean in the context that we are looking at the development and evolution of autonomous systems. So, we also want to look at what are their actual interpretations and implications for the design, that in case we want to have an attribute of reflection, how are we going to implement this in the system that there is a reflection. So, let us try and understand each of these in some detail and then see whether they make sense to us from a system design perspective for autonomous systems. So, the perception essentially is related to interpretation of stimuli, which means if the system receives a stimulus, you have to interpret what it means. For example, I just give you, suppose we see something, we automatically start interpreting as to what is it. That is exactly what the system has to do. Remove ambiguity, vagueness from complex input data and extract the relevant information. So, you will find that a simple attribute of perception itself involves so many tasks that need to be performed. That is, You have to remove ambiguity, you have to extract relevant information and data which is complex in many ways. And this is typically the input process of any system. And now you will immediately realize that to do this you will require sensors, signal conditioning, consistency and sanity checks of data received from many external sources. So, now when we open this up, the perception, essentially it is the input process of any system involving sensors, signal conditioning, data checks, parity check in digital systems, sanity checks on data saying that this data makes sense or not, or is some spurious thing is coming which we are thinking as data. The actions related to perception involve extraction of relevant information through either analysis or recognition. Sometimes it could be pattern recognition and things like that. Next, let us look at the reflection. Of course, reflection we also understand from our human perspective as something that we are thinking about something. And it is a similar kind of interpretation even in the context of an autonomous system that we are interested in creating. So, the idea is to create or update environment model in the real time context. What we mean by environmental model is that the moment we have received the inputs, we have removed the ambiguity, we have extracted the relevant information, that information now has to be pertaining to the environment in which we are operating. Just to give you an example, suppose you are in a car and you are driving in the night and suddenly you see another light coming from front. And if you see if it is one light, then it is probably a two-wheeler. If there are two lights, it could be a four-wheeler. And once you identify and remove the vagueness, then it immediately means that on the road you are not alone. That is the change in the environment which has happened to your environment, that you are not alone driving on the road. There is another vehicle which is coming and you need to take care of it. This is precisely what the reflection is. Of course, we use a little bit more generic word called situational awareness, that you are now aware of the situation, and this is based on whatever data you have received, other information stored that you are driving in the night, so that information is already available to you, and then you decide that yes, now there is another vehicle on the road. And the task is to use information to update the applicable environment model. Next comes the attribute of goal management. This essentially is an activity which involves selecting from a set of many possible goals the one which is most appropriate for a given situation, because all our behavior is goal seeking behavior or goal oriented responses. So, there could be many goals, you pick one which is the most appropriate, and then that goal is what you are going to try to achieve through your actions. This is same as fixing or redefining your destination. For example, at the last moment you may change your destination. So, that could be a redefinition of goals or targets, or there could be some intermediate sub goals. You may take a detour on the way before reaching the final destination. So, all these are part of goal management, and you will find that the primary task of a goal manager now is going to be to prioritize various tasks based on their criticality levels and using the techniques of optimization. Now, you will find that all the theory of optimization on the tools which are available are going to be involved in their goal management exercise. Then planning. Planning is concerned with the task of arriving at a strategy to achieve the goal. Goal management or identification of the goal is only one aspect. How does one achieve? For example, if I need to reach a point B, what is the path that I am going to take? What is the route that I am going to take? I am sure all of you have been using the Google Maps for navigation very frequently. Of course, this task automatically is done by the map system, that the moment you give the destination, it gives you a path not only it gives you one path, it gives you multiple paths, alternatives with their times, that this is 2 minutes faster, 3 minutes slower, and then you take a call. So, you are going to now pick a path, a strategy which will take you to the goal. It is almost similar to route or path planning, action plan, strategies, logical moves that are not only feasible but also consistent with the goal. For example, when you are playing chess, your planning would be, you are planning next 2 or 3 moves, what will do. Okay, I will move this piece, then I will move this piece, and then you wait for the opponent to do something. And this will involve lot of heuristics, which means arguments, non-technical information, pre-computed patterns, priori knowledge. All this will be required in order to come up with an action plan, and that is precisely the role of planning attribute in creating an autonomy. And then the last one comes self-adaptation. That brings in the ability to adjust the behavior through learning and reasoning in order to modify the goal management and planning process. Just to give you another example, suppose you are driving and suddenly you encounter a congestion on the road where you were. Suddenly there was a overturned vehicle and people are now trying to kind of sort. You need to immediately change your goal, change your route, everything you have to change. That change will come through this self-adaptation, that is to recognize that there is a need for change and then put in place. So, you will start looking for alternative routes. So, you will take another road which is going through some other area and see whether there are any possibilities of again reaching the main road after the blockage has been cleared. So, all that is part of self-adaptation. You change yourself, which means system itself becomes a new system, different system, which means the system that you started off with is no longer the system. It is essentially concerned with assimilating new knowledge to improve understanding, and is typical of, for example, training a neural network or changing a control algorithm. Suppose you are using a control algorithm with certain gains and then things are not working out okay, so you go back and modify the gains. It is a new system altogether now. And the main task here is to assess the coherency of exchange information, generate new knowledge. So, all that exercise which generates new knowledge is going to be part of self-adaptation, and it will give directives to goal manager, including it will go back to perception, so that your environment model also gets appropriately adapted and updated. So, what do these mean? If you really look at these 5 attributes of autonomy that I have just now described, they might at this point just mean words, but let us try and make sense out of these. So, from human intelligence perspective, we find that these 5 attributes that we are now saying that should be part of any autonomous system that we want to create, there are actually similarities that if we understand, we also kind of have a better connect with these attributes. So, the first 2 attributes, perception and reflection, they are essentially understanding the situation of the environment. So, what we as humans say, I have understood, we are essentially at the background doing these 2 actions, perception and reflection, that we are seeing a scenario, we are perceiving it, and we are processing it, the data, to understand what the situation is all about, or what we call the situational awareness. Then the goal management and planning are concerned with decisions and actions, which means based on our understanding, we take decisions. So, the decision is your goal management, and actions that we are going to take are part of your planning and strategy, which are compatible with the goal. So, if you look at decision and actions together, They essentially are together performing the task of goal management and planning. And the last one, self-adaptation, is essentially to ensure that the decisions that we are making and actions that we are taking are consistent with respect to environment through feedback and learning mechanism. So, this is where the learning happens. The self-adaptation is primarily the learning part of your autonomic attribute. Now, having talked about these 5 attributes, there is something which I have not yet talked about, but now it is critical that I introduce that 6th attribute called the knowledge repository. This is something which is so intuitive to all of us that we never think about it. I mean, how many times have you said, I know it? The question is, how do you know it? From where has the knowledge come? It has not come out of nothing. There has been a continuous learning process right from the time that you were born, which at some point is becoming knowledge. So, today you can say that yes, I know this, I know that, I know maths, I know algebra, I know chemistry, I know physics. That I know is your knowledge repository, but that repository is created through lot of hard work, and you will realize that without this 6th attribute of knowledge repository, the other 5 really are not very useful. Unless you have knowledge, there is no way you can actually perform those 5 attributes. You need knowledge. As I said, all systems that intend to possess the feature of autonomy, they have to have knowledge repository as an essential prerequisite. In fact, this is the prerequisite. It has to be there before you can talk about the remaining 5. It is commonly of 2 types, design time knowledge and the runtime knowledge. Design time knowledge is something which, as the designer of a system, you implement based on your own understanding of that problem. And the runtime knowledge is the one which the system acquires through the learning or the self-adaptation attribute as it operates in a real world. So, design time knowledge specifies basic components of the environment, observability, key properties and methods related to system goals. It also incorporates a list of methods to enrich the knowledge during the operational phase of the system. So, at the time of design, you will put in some knowledge, basic understanding, okay, this is all what it is, and it also will put in the system a way by which it can update the knowledge. So, there will be an update mechanism available, that as it operates, it can update the knowledge based on what it learns. And the runtime knowledge essentially is through monitors, learning, analysis techniques. So, the system models which are generated from analysis techniques, reasoning. Sometimes you learn from failures, a system that you think should work in a way does not work. So, you go back and start looking at why it is not working, and then you learn, and in the process you go back and modify. And by and large, the runtime knowledge is the one which is going to help you in removing the ambiguities about environment related information, including information about its dynamic nature. So, to conclude this segment, we have talked about the 5 attributes of autonomy, capture the essential features of human intelligence and incorporate these in any machine. The whole idea is it is expected to function on its own. And in this, you have to realize that the knowledge is the binding glue that is going to link all these 5 attributes. And the basic premise is that we are talking about autonomy in almost a human like format, that the way we function in autonomous manner, we would like the system to operate in the same manner, and for that not only we need the 5 attributes of perception, reflection, goal management, planning and self adaptation, we also need the knowledge repository. Now, with that we come to the end of this particular segment of lecture, and we will continue this discussion in the next segment, and to that I hope I will see you in the next session, and so bye and thank you for being part of this particular segment.